someone said like Spotify I don't remember what it was missing something that it should have been in place like from
Yeah, like a
day one.
database.
Yeah.
Yeah, was
Well,
that
the
it?
thing is that they go through Harry Fox to see who they need to pay mechanicals to, but they're not very good at it because, like, I've had like notices of intent from like Spotify uses of my client songs, and I call them up and I'm like, okay, I represent this person, like, let's get them paid. And they're like, you need to go through Harry Fox, you need to be registered. And I'm like, my client is registered with Harry Fox, so what are you not doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
so.
that's something that we deal with literally every day, with the song file and just making sure works are properly registered, that they show up in the system. Because registration doesn't mean that it's processed, and people don't realize that there's a big gap between when you deliver your registration and when it's actually processed. For example, the Copyright Office is eight months. Sound Exchange could be 4 months. So just because you deliver the song doesn't mean it's actually live in their database for licensing. So we're literally dealing with that with the repertoire departments and metadata departments every single day of saying, hey, why isn't this showing up in the system on song file for Spotify, for HFA, or for song decks for music reports, for Amazon and Pandora. So that's super important.
Erin has to leave. We have Day with us still for the rest of the show, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so Day, a question for you. Music, copyright, and technology. Is this a field that you're somewhat specialized in and you care?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spent the last several years focusing on the intersection of music and technology and innovation. I specifically teach music industry and entrepreneurship and innovation at UCLA. What I'm seeing right now, I have a workshop that I put on called Music 2020, the next era of innovation in the music industry, where I'm talking about disruption and innovation. There's a lot of really interesting technologies that have been developed, that are being developed, that are starting to scale within the music industry around creation, but also around rights and consumer interaction with music. So, for example, AI, artificial intelligence. We're seeing really interesting activations with using AI, and for example, you can use a Snapchat filter to sort of feel like you're going into a music video set using AI. That's augmented reality. For AI, it's more around, you were seeing, with artificial intelligence, we're seeing compositions, actual songs being composed by AI. There's AI music, there's a couple other companies in that space that are using AI around music creation. Augmented reality is what I meant in regards to the earlier example of the using devices to be able to create some kind of digital experience in your real world. There's VR, so virtual reality. We're seeing like VR concerts where you can put on a VR headset and sort of be in this immersive concert experience. More on rights, we're looking at blockchain platforms are being developed to handle licensing and rights and cryptocurrency and tokenization of certain apps are being used for people to be able to invest into or buy pieces of a song. So there's a lot of stuff happening right now that I think over the next several years we're going to see that whole kind of innovation space explode.
One thing that it just popped in my head that I read not long ago was an app or a news site or something that allows people to buy copyrights, to buy some shares of artist songs.
So VEZT is probably the one you're thinking about, which is really popular right now. I know those guys. But yeah, so there's a number of companies in the space where you can acquire or invest into song copyrights.
Okay.
So Vest is one of those where you are you're investing into a particular track and you're receiving a payout from the earnings from that track. There's other platforms like Royalty Exchange where you can actually acquire catalogs. There's a couple of other ones in the space where basically they're allowing consumers to be able to invest into a copyright and receive payouts on that. So Vest is one of them, which they're trying to also use cryptocurrency and blockchain as a part of their overall ecosystem.
Okay.
Day, on this AI creating music stuff, what type of problems can we get into with that? Like
I've seen this debated at a conference actually in New York, where there was the founder of an AI music service and a lawyer talking about the idea of who owns the copyright in this music that's being created via AI. And the founder of the company is saying, well, the AI is going to own the copyright, and the lawyer said, well, that's ridiculous. It's not a real person; it can't own a copyright. And so there's this argument right now, or this debate within the creative kind of rights tech community of does a natural person have to own the copyright? Can the AI somehow own the copyright? What does that look like in the future? So that's an issue. Is if you're composing, for example, IBM did a collaboration, and I forget the producer's name, but they have IBM Watson, which is its big kind of AI project, and they did a collaboration on music. Again, there's AImusic.com, there's I think it's Pure Music is another one, or Pure Tracks, and they're all looking at how can we help, and it's different. I think there's different applications of this. Like there's film composers or for filmmakers who are going to services to license music created by AI in real time. So it might give it, tell it kind of, the theme for the scene, and it composes music. So obviously traditional film composers will not be happy with that. And then you have people, able to license or buy tracks composed by these AI systems, and then write songs, do a top line on it. So I think it's very interesting to see kind of where it goes. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to evolve. And how we adapt to that as an industry is not only AI, but also like all the other things around blockchain and cryptocurrency as well. How we adapt to those things within how the music industry operates. We'll see the outcome of that in the next, I think, several years.
So we really don't know right now. If
there's a ton of use cases. I have examples in this presentation that I put together that talks about each of these different segments. But there's a ton of use cases and a lot of projects right now. Like Jax out of the UK has a project called Chord. And Chord is this blockchain-based rights and asset management system that's supposed to help labels process rights management and licensing more efficiently on the blockchain. Then there's .blockchain music or .blockchain media, which was co-founded by Benji Rogers, who founded Pledge Music. And the initiative there is really around creating this blockchain platform, these decentralized platform for storing rights information and sharing that information. So there's a number of projects that are underway. Xactuals have a project called Ray, which we're partners with at Tune Registry. So it's using AI to help enrich metadata around catalogs, so that if you're missing information about your metadata, you can get that from the Ray system and then enrich your catalog. So it's a lot of really interesting use cases.
Two questions. One is, what are metadata for the audience that doesn't?
That's a great question. It's a very important question. So metadata is the information about your music, right? And there's and we look at metadata in three kind of categories. There's the rights ownership metadata, basically who actually owns the copyrights, right? And then there's the production metadata of what is the track, who worked on it, who's the production credits, background vocals, all that stuff. What is
credits?
The credits, but also what is the BPMs and what we call the tags, right? The genre, the BPMs, the mood, the signature, key signature, all that stuff. So that's more of the production side or recording side metadata. And then you have your release metadata. Is how is this bundled? What album does it appear on? Where is it? Who owns the actual album and all that stuff. So there's different buckets of metadata. We section it out in Tune Registry as song, recording, and release, and they're all related. So it's kind of interrelated buckets. That information you have to gather. As a music creator, you have to gather that information. Most of the time you know that information, but it's not gathered anywhere, right? It's not stored anywhere. So you might know in the moment when we're writing the track and everyone in the room who played keys and who did drums and who did the mixing and what studio is being mastering it and what, all that stuff. But in 3 months, are you going to remember, all those details?
So it's just a matter of for the artist to provide those information to you?
Well, that information directly impacts the licensing and royalties, right? For example, if you don't remember, not necessarily if you don't remember, let's say you don't remember. Let's say you're one of those artists that records in different countries. Let's say you're a Canadian artist who's in and out of Canada, Drake, or Celine Dion or Justin Bieber, right? In and out of Canada. What was Bieber Canadian? I forget. But yeah, okay. He's been here too long. Like, if you don't remember if you recorded this in Toronto or in,
LA,
whatever in LA, that's going to directly impact the eligibility of that recording to receive neighboring rights royalties, for example, because the country in which it's recorded is going to impact whether it's eligible for neighboring rights royalties.
Okay.
So without that data point, the actual studio in which we record it, not even the label who owns it or the artist who's on it, it's about the address of the studio.
Okay.
So if you don't have that information, then you won't, if it's 10 years gone by, and you're looking back at your catalog, you've done 100 songs since then, and you don't remember if you recorded this while you were on a trip in Paris, or if you recorded this, when you were in Atlanta, if you don't remember, then that's going to directly impact an entire category of royalties that you may be eligible for.
Where the artists write or register these metadata?
Where they write, where you record a song matters, and you have to be able to capture that information about the name of the recording studio, the address, who engineered it. Was it mastered outside of the recording studio in a different studio? You need the name of the mastering studio, the address, the mastering engineer. All that stuff matters because they directly impact different types of royalties.
Where do you write these data?
Well, you can store it in Tune Registry. Okay. So we have fields for all this stuff, right? So if you use Tune Registry, this is where you store that information. So you don't have to worry about, okay, I don't know exactly what I need to collect. Oh, I think one of the challenges is, I think a lot of artists are familiar with the idea of metadata, but they're familiar with the idea of more of meta tags, right? Genre,
MP3.
BPM, right? They're familiar with that. They're not familiar necessarily with rights and ownership metadata, so you don't necessarily know what to look for or what to collect, right? It may just, in Tune Registry, we collect over 150 data points per track. So if you don't know what to collect, you're not going to even think about it in the first place.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So when you have a system like ours, you're going to see it on the screen, and you're going to be able to read the information about that particular data point, and then you'll be able to I need to get this done. Or you can ask questions to our customer success reps, and they can tell you, you need an IPI number. This is what an IPI number is. It's called a CAE outside of the, in Europe. It's called an IPI in the US. This is where you get it from, and so it breaks it down. So okay, now I'm more educated about the business and the metadata. Once you have that, it doesn't change. Right, it's forever. Like my IPI number at ASCAP is going to be the same as long as you're with ASCAP, and it's going to stay the same. So, and you don't change your name. So you get these things, and you need to store it someplace because all metadata matters.
Yeah, of course.
For example, if you don't have your track listing, right? If you don't know exactly who did what on the record, especially if you're a record that's a lot of instrumentation, like a lot of live instruments, like you really want to make sure you have an accurate spelling of names, the instrument that they played, what their contribution was, because that's needed when you're registering for certain royalties in Canada, for example. Mm-hmm. They need all the background vocalists and session musicians, otherwise they can't register the work. So, you would then miss out on those type of royalties. So it's important to capture all the information.
And I think we covered that earlier, but just to repeat it, how do you get that API number
IPI.
So IPI,
Okay.
so the IPI number is a unique identifier assigned to you from your PRO. So in the U.S., that'd be ASCAP, BMI, or CSEC.
You just sign yourself in
When
that.
you join those
join.
organizations, they will assign you an IPI
Okay.
number. So it's like, here's your identifier. That number is used anytime you're identifying yourself as a income participant or owner in a composition of the
Okay.
song. On the master side, it's different. On the master side, we use what's called an IPN number, which is International Performer Number. So that's a different, kind of identifier. And earlier, Aaron used the phrase of like a social security number. I use the same phrase. I think it's like a social security number in the music industry. So you need to have that. Now, some songwriters are not affiliated with a PRO or CMO. Happens a lot in the EDM world. I used to manage EDM producers, and they will collaborate with other producers in different countries, and they may not have joined the PRO in their territory, so therefore they don't have an IPI number. And when my producer goes to register to ASCAP or BMI and put this person's name, it's going to show as no society, or NS, meaning this person is not affiliated with any society in the world. And there is there's a problem with that, because when you register a song, the song is also assigned a particular identifier, which is called an ISWC, which is International Standard Work Code. But that will not be assigned if at least one of the writers doesn't have an IPI number.
Okay.
So then if you don't have ISWC, then there's no way for, you reduce the ways in which a service like Spotify can
track.
match and track, the royalties to the song, because there's no identifier.
Okay. And for the master side, what is the name of that number again?
So on the master side, so let me break it down simply. So you have your copyright in your master or your sound recording, and you have your copyright in your composition. So the composition identifier is called ISWC, International Standard Work Code. The identifier for a sound recording is called ISRC, which is International Standard Recording Code. And then the parties, meaning for the composition, it'd be the publishers and the writers. They have IPI numbers for the song, for the composition.
Okay.
For the parties, when it comes to the master, they have a IPN number, which is the International Performer Number.
Okay. And you have to join that association to get that number.
Yeah, so these numbers are all assigned to you by the rights organizations. So in the U.S., Sound Exchange will assign to you an IPN number, which can be used with other neighboring rights organizations around the world.
Also, the other distributor can do that. Like,
distributors cannot assign to you those numbers. What a distributor can assign is an ISRC code to the recording, or a UPC code to the overall release. So
Okay.
your release will have a UPC code, which is the Universal Product Code, and the recording, each track. So if I have an album of 14 tracks, so the album itself is going to have a UPC code, the Universal Product Code for the whole album. And that album, let's say I have a digital album, and then I have a vinyl of the exact same production with the same 14 tracks. That vinyl has a different UPC because it's a different product type.
okay.
So it's a universal product code. So each product type, whether if I have a CD, a vinyl, and a digital album, all the same release, each product will have a different UPC, right? Because they're different formats.
Different
then
media.
within that product are the individual tracks. And each track or each recording will have a ISRC, International Standard Recording Code. That doesn't change from product to product. So that recording appears on the vinyl version and the CD version, even though both those products have different UPCs. The recording has the same ISRC, because it's like the social security number for the recording, no matter what it appears on. Then within that recording is the composition, right? The underlying musical work, which has an ISWC code.
Okay.
Right. So it can get very funky. If for example, we mentioned earlier the covers. If I do a cover of a song, and then you do the same cover, the song has the same ISWC code, right? But now you have an ISRC code for your recording, of
course,
and I have an ISRC code for my recording.
Makes sense.
And then my recording is going to end up on my digital album with its own UPC code, and your recording is going to end up on your vinyl with your own UPC code. So now it's all these different codes. But they all need to flow back to that one ISWC code. And songs that have like thousands of covers on different formats, on different UPCs and different ISRCs, in different territories, they all have to flow back to that very first ISWC code. And if it doesn't, if any one of those legs are broken or chains are broken, then that creates the black box royalties.
Okay.
Because it cannot identify the connections between the starting song.
Where the money of that black box go?
So the black box money is distributed by market share on a periodically. So we use black box in a very broad term. Black box means, any entity that has unattributed or unallocated or unpaid royalties that is otherwise due to a party, right? A third party. So if I'm a label, for example, earlier, when we started getting digital services, remember the big scandal came out, all the labels got giant advances from Spotify, right? So let's say I'm a label and Spotify gives me an advance of $10 million to license my catalog. And then the labels will then receive usage reports back from Spotify saying this is how much of the music we used. And then from that $10 million, we're going to pay out the artist. Now, let's say at the end of that contract, which was like 3 years, I think the first contract, sometimes it's like 1 year. So at the end of the contract, whatever's left over that has been unallocated is like, let's say $2 million still hasn't been allocated, meaning we've only received the usage statements for about $8 million worth of the original advance. Mm-hmm. There's $2 million that's unallocated. That would be black box.
Okay.
Because it hasn't been allocated to any individual usage, right? It's been paid against the catalog, but it hasn't been allocated to any individual track or artist. Right, so that's one example. The other example is digital services, paying royalties for the mechanical, for all the mechanical usage on streaming services, but are unable to identify who the copyright owner is in the song. Mm-hmm. So that money sits in a black box.
Okay.
Right, and that's because the song isn't properly registered, right? So they can identify, we call it address unknown notification, notice of intents. They don't have the address, so they send the notice of intent to the Copyright Office. The MMA has just changed that process, so that's what's being changed next year. But there's lots of other ways in which black box royalties are created. When music, there's pretty much any type of right that exists that generates a royalty, there's a black box associated with it.
Okay.
Because there's some unregistered work somewhere in that part of the business.
And you at Tune Registry are often able to find the owner of those money that are in the black
Tune
box?
Registry. So I started. I've started two companies. I've started more than two companies, but the two recent companies are Royalty Claim and Tune Registry. I sold Royalty Claim, so I don't operate that anymore. But what Royalty Claim was it is a search engine for unclaimed royalties and licenses. So we'd go out and gather the information from rights organizations. We'd gather their unclaimed lists, and then we make it searchable, basically. Okay. So you can go and put in your name or your title, and there's multiple databases within Royalty Claim. So you go to different databases. You can look up unclaimed royalties, unclaimed licenses, unclaimed neighboring rights. We can tell you, for example, in 2016, there was a usage statement for your track on MTV in Italy, and it potentially generated a royalty. Or this radio station in Serbia. Like we have all these different countries: Kazakhstan, Serbia, Moldova.
So it's worldwide.
Italy, worldwide.
It's not just for copyrights in U.S.
For neighboring rights is outside U.S.
Okay.
So neighboring rights is going to be international. The other ones are all U.S. So the unclaimed royalties for digital radio royalties and unclaimed licenses, unclaimed notice of intents, which are related to mechanical royalties for like Spotify and Pandora and some other services. So that's what Royalty Claim does. Is basically you search that to see if we have information, and we have over over 100 million records. And that's a very small sample size compared to what's really out there in the whole marketplace. So that's what royalty claim is doing. Tune registry is doing something different. Tune registry is not going out to find your royalties. Tune registry is disseminating your ownership information so that you don't end up with unclaimed royalties in the first place.
Cool.
So we're trying to prevent unclaimed royalties from happening. Unclaimed royalties happen if your works are not registered, or if you're not properly identified, or if it is registered but the information is incorrect or incomplete. So we're trying to fix the registrations so that the royalties flow. So that's what Tune Registry is doing. That's why I call it, royalty claim is treatment, meaning
Prevention.
and Tune Registry is prevention.
Yeah.